improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition for the week of February the 5th. I am your host, as always, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, and I'm going to do the once around the world, and then we'll check in with the usual suspects, talk about some of the current events that have caught my eye, and will catch your ear. But before we do that, I do want to give a special thank you to my good friends at Stakeholder Prepping. Check them out at stakeholderprepping.com. They've got a wonderful podcast, which I was the lucky guest on a short time ago. That'll be coming up next week for your listening pleasure. They have a website that has some decent equipment for you to check out and a wealth of knowledge for you to digest and listen to. So if you are a preparedness interested party or somebody who is just entering into the preparedness realm or an expert, I think you'll find their website to be very helpful and their information to be extraordinarily so. So let's get right into it. Beverage of choice for this evening is an Islay single malt Scotch whiskey, Kilcan, which I particularly enjoy. It's peaty, it's on the nose, finishes clean, and it is my drink for today. So let's check in with global events, taking a look at CENTCOM. First and foremost, they have the Iran country in their jurisdiction. So as I am sure you are fully aware, things are pretty busy over in that part of the world right now. We have had a Iranian drone take a run at a aircraft carrier, specifically the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is not unusual, not unexpected, stupid on the country of Iran, but also really risky for naval shipping. We have not really seen large swarm drone attacks against U.S. naval vessels, and we haven't yet. This is not a swarm. This is one drone. It was easily intercepted and shot down by F-35Cs based off of the Abraham Lincoln, flying air patrol, basically. It was a Shahed 139 drone, and there has not been a defense against a large swarm attack. But I think that it is a potential. It is a useful asymmetrical warfare tool for a not a near-peer adversary to use, or even a near-peer, and it's very difficult to defend against. I don't think that the United States has a complex and robust counter-drone technology for naval yet, but I know it's being worked on. I know it's being tested, and I'm pretty sure it will roll out here within the next 12 to 18 months with some kind of enterprise architecture. Okay, so what else is going on? U.S. Army sent the 10th Mountain Division Brigade to CENTCOM. They're going to rotate out a guard unit that's already there for OIR coverage. And additionally, we've got Syria report strikes on ISIS targets. That was early February, late January, early February, recently enough. And that's just to continue pressure on ISIS and retaliation for prior ambushes and strikes. There's also joint naval exercises coming up today with Saudi Arabia, and that's an enduring exercise. The United States consistently does cross-training with a lot of our partners, a lot of our peers, a lot of our friends, interoperability training. It is a way to foment relationships with a lot of these countries. And then in the event that we have to work together in some kind of coalition, and we've done it before. So it's business as usual, with the exception of Iran. They're also, and we'll talk about this in a separate segment, but they're conducting some, small boat harassment, interdiction operations in the Strait of Hormuz. And they've been doing this for, decades, to be perfectly honest. So that is escalating slightly because of the existing tensions between Iran and the United States in that region, but it is not because of it, right? So let's pivot over to Eurocom, Europe, Ukrainian, Russia, that triangle. As of today, February 5th, we are conducting U.S. and Russian high-level military-to-military dialogue, explicitly framing how we avoid miscalculations and escalations. There's a lot of shared airspace. And the one thing, even at the height of tensions between Russia and the United States, we have always done is deconflict. We did it in Syria. We've done it in Afghanistan. We've done it in a lot of places so that things don't accidentally spiral out of control. And I've talked about this before. If we're going to strike a target that is not a Russian target, but may have Russian lives, Russian, citizens on the ground, we always give them a heads up. If we're going to overfly Russian territory, not Russia, the country, but Russian occupied territory outside of their home turf, we always let them know. And quid pro quo, it goes both ways. When we start launching drones and missiles, whether it's Tomahawks, medium range, whatever the case may be, if there's an ounce of risk that could be absorbed by Russia, then we always make sure that we talk to them. Again, Black Sea dynamics, energy grid targeting, a lot of the things that are taking place between Ukraine and Russia has the potential to escalate. And so this is a good thing. We've done it in the past. We're going to continue to do it. So that's what's taking place in Europe Command right now. I'm not going to really get into the discussions about Ukraine and the ceasefire, Russia, and their breaking of the ceasefire or loosely breaking it. They're not literally breaking it, but I don't really want to talk about that in this particular opening segment. We're probably going to get to it in its own standalone here very quickly. Taking a look at AFRICOM, we've got Nigeria. The U.S. dispatched a small team to Nigeria after strikes on ISIS targets, and it's the first real official acknowledgement of U.S. forces on the ground in that context. There is no open source reporting on the affiliation of that small team. But if you read between the lines, small and team, it's probably a unit at least under the command and control of JSOC, SOCOM. That would be my guess. Somalia, AFRICOM, we did more airstrikes against ISIS in Somalia as well as Al-Shabaab. And we coordinated that with Somalia's government. We've talked about that a little in the past. That is continuing. And I think that's a positive step. Our find, fix, and finish kill chain has not gone away, and it will not go away, where ISIS and a lot of the terrorist organizations that we have on our watch list is concerned. We will continue to prosecute those targets wherever they are around the world. And so I would imagine that that's, going to get buried at page 3 or page 4, but, it's still going on, and I like talking about it just to make sure that everybody is keeping score. Indo-Pacific, Indo-PACOM, we have bilateral maritime cooperative agreements and activities inside the Philippines economic exclusion zone. Philippines have had a lot of interaction with China over the Scarborough Shoal. So we are doing a lot of joint sailing and a lot of drills around that area in Philippines economic exclusion zone, sort of just to send a message to China that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Philippines, that the Philippine sovereignty needs to be respected. And this is basically going to be taking place probably for the foreseeable future, constantly doing this check and balance against Chinese hegemony and their assumption that they own much more of the open seas than they actually do. So I don't know. So that's taking place. There was a agreement that took place a while back to give Australia some Virginia-class submarines, and we have sort of put a pause on that. That is a current story. The reason, at least, that has been cited is that we are unable to build them. We do not have the shipbuilding capability in the United States that we once had. If you look at what we were doing, post World War II and all the way up into the, 60s and 70s and even the 80s to a lesser extent, we had a pretty robust shipbuilding capability, and we really lost the ability to produce naval vessels at scale. The quality control is fantastic. We do some great modular shipbuildings. The way ships are put together these days, it's fantastic. But we have constraints and we have strategic prioritization debates. If we talk about building new ships to replace some of our aging U.S. fleets, then they take precedent over naval vessels that are slated for export for foreign military sales. And this, unfortunately, is one of those things that has been put on pause. Not a lot of outcry from the Australians at the moment, but I would imagine that a lot of that is kept pretty quiet so as not to badmouth the hand that feeds them. Australia does not have the ability to lay down some of these ships themselves, so buying from the United States is oftentimes cheaper, it's easier, but they're going to have to wait. So that's what's taking place in that part of the world. Let's move on to Western Hemisphere or SOUTHCOM. We are continuing to do operations in the Caribbean in support of DHS, continuing to do this quarantine. And we did strike January 23rd. So, it's not exactly current news, but we did strike a vessel in the Eastern Pacific on the 23rd of January. And that's being reported by Reuters. If you kind of take a holistic view or to summarize everything, the U.S. military is really doing three things at once right now. We're deterring Iran while avoiding this cascade effect of escalatory actions on behalf of both of us. We're reopening these safety valves with Russia to reduce miscalculation while the Ukrainian war remains very kinetic. And then we are buying time in Indo-Pacific with a lot of our partners while industry quietly has constraints and it potentially could threaten the credibility of long-term promises. So those are our once around the world. When it comes to military current events, if anything changes, I always try to categorize it and cross-reference it. And we'll talk about it in the next SITREP. So with that being said, let's bounce over to Iran, which is, I think, preparing to negotiate in good faith while preparing for war at the same time. Iran is in a serious reduction of force state than it has ever been in its history. But that doesn't mean that they cannot lash out. It doesn't mean that they cannot strike. And it doesn't mean that they cannot spiral things out of control pretty quickly. Part of that was the story that came out recently that stated that they tested a medium-range ballistic missile. And as it turns out, the reporting on that is not credible. There's nothing that I can find open source that definitively states that they tested one of these medium-range ballistic missiles, the Khorram Shar 4. And I am telling you right now, I'm not pronouncing that correctly. You will have to forgive me. I'm barely sufficient in English as a primary language. Do not ask me to also speak foreign. But I do know this weapons platform. It was originally developed by the Chinese. They sold it. No, Chinese or North Koreans, because it makes a difference. I feel like it was the Chinese, but now that I'm thinking about it, I may be second guessing myself. There's a lot of stuff rattling around in this brain, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. It was originally developed by a outside agency, and they sold it to Iran, and Iran, changed some things, modified it a little bit, did some minor evolutions, but essentially it has been their medium-range ballistic missile for a while now. So there was some reporting that they tested it, but what is credible is that they are deploying it and showcasing it in an underground missile city. And that is telling in a couple of ways. It tells the rest of the world that they are prepared for defense against a preemptive strike. When you put a missile underground in a hardened bunker in some kind of a missile city, if you will, you're signaling that you are expecting a first strike and you want to be able to defend against that. It's why all of our missile fields are buried deep underground. our nuclear triad, ground-based leg of the nuclear triad anyways. We don't really have a lot of medium-range ballistic missiles that are hardened, but they are also available on naval vessels, either surface or subsurface. So we don't necessarily need to put them underground encased in bunkers, but in this case, that's what they're doing. So if operationally deployed underground, it signals a higher survivability, faster retaliatory readiness, and a more demanding missile defense problem. The other thing that they have done to these that is interesting to note is they have attached a multiple reentry warhead on the tip. And what this does is once the medium-range ballistic missile is fired, the warhead breaks into a couple of different independently tracked missiles. It makes defense against it harder. It's not a impossible defense, but it is more difficult because you have now multiple reentry vehicles attacking a single target that you have to defend against, and each one is moving independent from one another. The concern is not against the United States because these just do not have the range. The definition is in the name. It's a medium-range ballistic missile, not an intercontinental. But the neighbor across the ocean there, across the waterways, certainly is. So Israel is about a 12-minute flight time for these missiles, and that makes Israel a little twitchy, admittedly so. But a lot of this depends on launch site and trajectory, obviously. This report is actually coming from Iranian state media. So they're the ones that are reporting this, and that's... You can kind of read a lot from that in and of itself because it means that they are telegraphing that they are moving these and basing them underground because they want the United States to know about it. So, again, it's all operational survivability. These carry, if I remember correctly, a 1,200 kilogram payload. No, 1,500 kilogram payload. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good, and that's pretty large for a medium-range ballistic missile, and that expands the effects because it could potentially fuel a nuclear delivery concern, even if Tehran denies the intent. These platforms lend themselves to retrofitting with a nuclear tip instead of a conventional. The maneuverable reentry vehicle adds a wrinkle simply because it complicates mid-course prediction, interception. The biggest thing about this is it's tied to diplomacy. The timing of this is so obvious. It can be seen right through. The Iranian negotiators and the United States negotiators are sitting down to talk about de-escalation. So when they basically say, look what we have and look what can ride out in a bunker, it's leverage, and it's meant to shape the U.S. calculation around, talks and sanctions and escalation thresholds. It doesn't do a whole lot to dissuade the United States, but it's definitely something that Israel needs to pay attention to, and I have no doubt that they are. Their Iron Dome is fairly robust. It's really designed for something of this size. The Israeli Iron Dome struggles when you are talking about small drone swarms. That's where they will typically launch fixed-wing aircraft and ask for U.S. and other countries' help providing some of those sorties, as we've seen in the past. So a couple of caveats when it comes to this story. Understand that deployed, when state media is saying deployed, it can mean anything from fielded and ready to simply just staged. And there's no way to independently confirm anything that they're saying. We don't have a lot of reporters on the ground in Iran putting microphones in the faces of senior military leaders. The flight times vary where they're launching it from, whether it's loft, whether it's depressed trajectory, what the payload is. So The time really varies. It can be as long as a 15-minute flight time. And, hopefully we're not going to have to find out. Iran engaging with Israel is probably the worst thing that they could do right now while we are at the table with negotiations taking place here soon, while they have a U.S. carrier group parked off of their coast. So, yeah, but that's sort of taking place in the backdrop of negotiations. And let's talk about negotiations here for a moment. Iran is scheduled for talks tomorrow, as a matter of fact, in Oman. Muscat is the name of the place in Oman that these negotiations are going to take place. Multiple outlets are reporting this. Iran is not really, I don't want to say admitted it, but they're not exactly trumpeting the fact that they're about to sit down with the Americans and negotiate again. I want to talk a little bit about the negotiations that are upcoming, what we can expect, what some of the outcomes are. And then I'd also sort of want to take a trip down memory lane and look at some of the negotiations that we've had with Iran in the past, because past is often prologue, and we can derive a lot of information about what these talks can yield by looking at what we have done with them in the past. The talks were originally close to collapsing over a bunch of really, small administrative issues like the venue, the format. Was it Turkey? Was it Oman? Who is going to participate? Who is going to observe? Oman is historically kind of the quiet channel because they can host without the optics of alignment that other venues create. So they have heretofore been kind of the go-to Switzerland, if you will, of the Middle East when it comes to these kind of negotiations. The other thing that they're discussing, or at least arguing about, is the agenda. Iran says nuclear only, but the U.S. wants a broader package, like, missiles and the control that they have over some of the proxies. And that's currently the biggest friction point right now leading up to these negotiations is, what the fuck are we going to talk about? So, in addition to the medium-range ballistic missile that we just spoke about, the IGRC is currently escalating a lot of maritime pressures in the Strait of Hormuz. Today, we had the IRGC Navy seize 2 foreign oil tankers in the Persian Gulf near the Farsi Islands. They are claiming that it was part of a fuel smuggling operation. The crews are reportedly in custody, and the vessels are moving towards one of their ports, the Iranian ports in Bashir. So this is very typical of the Iranians. I have seen this reported in the news. I have been, on the ground, if you will, so it's a waterway, but I've been adjacent to units that have been interdicted by Iranian patrol boats claiming that they were encroaching across the border. The point is this is very typical. They do this all the time, and they will frame it as law enforcement, but it's timed in a way and done in a way to signal leverage when we have U.S. and Iranian negotiations take place, or there's any time that they want to respond to U.S. pressures in the region. On the 3rd of February, we had a group of fast attack boats, and I have seen this firsthand while transiting the Strait of Hormuz on naval vessels. These IRGC fast attack boats will approach naval vessels, sort of harass. In this case, it wasn't a naval vessel. It was a U.S. flagged tanker, the Stena Imperative, near the Strait of Hormuz, about 16 nautical miles north of Oman, and they threatened to board the vessel. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations report says that they were hailed on VHF radio and ordered to stop. They didn't. They continued to transit, which is, the smart move. But the threat was there, and it is, I think, going to cause concerns when these type of risks increase. It drives up the cost of insuring these vessels, and sometimes it trips the threshold of affordability. And then that just drives market prices up. I don't know what this particular merchant vessel was carrying, but if it's not carrying it because it can't get insurance because the risk to the underwriter is too high, then whatever goods that was carrying wherever it was going is now not coming to market, which drives up demand or at least reduces supply. CENTCOM's issued recently public warnings about unsafe IRGC behavior, just overflights, high-speed approaches, weapons trained, all of that forces naval vessels in the area to tighten their rules of engagement, increase their force protection response or force protection status for U.S. bases in the region. And the other thing that it does is it lays legal and political groundwork for a response if escalation continues. So this can kind of bite them in the ass. If they continue and we respond, they don't really have a leg to stand on. I mean, they're kind of the ones that are forcing our hand in a use of force conflict. So, yeah. The near term on this is it just aggregates and inflames the tensions between the United States and Iran at a very sensitive and critical moment as we move into these negotiations. Iran, though, they do get a lot of advantages when it comes to this. They have an asymmetrical advantage at sea because, as I mentioned, doing this raises the cost of commerce. It forces escorts or reroutes for ships, so they may not even transit. They may just go around, or they may have to hire or ask for an escort. And they can use those arrests and judicial custody as bargaining chips. So, yeah, the most dangerous scenario, so that was the most likely scenario. The most dangerous scenario is if they try to do a boarding attempt, or if there's a collision, or we have to fire warning shots, or there's a drone or a boat instance that causes casualties. That's worst case scenario for a lot of these. So what I would say is in the next 72 hours, take a look at the readouts from Muscat, whether they announce that they are only going to talk about nuclear or they're going to talk about a broader regional security framework. That's going to signal whether Iran has the willingness to sit down and negotiate or if it is the same old. Shipping advisories, whether or not there's an incident uptick, whether insurers reprice Hormuz transits. I think they will. Markets are twitchy. Oil, the price of oil, I think went up $1 a barrel just within the last 72, 96 hours, something like that, based off of the IGRC takedown of those two vessels that they said were smuggling foreign oil. The other thing to look at within the next 72 hours is crew nationalities and who owns the boats that are being the recipient of these asymmetrical warfare attacks, these harassment attacks, the ship takedowns, the seizing. Is it specific states or is it a generic foreign uptick to minimize backlash? If they're targeting specific countries' vessels, it's going to be a problem. I mean, it's a problem regardless, but you're going to have a measured response versus, it's a DUI checkpoint for everybody, so to speak. CENTCOM, look for language from them declaring the actions of these small boats as unsafe versus hostile intent. Once they start using hostile intent, that's a major escalation marker because it opens the window to the immediate next step, which is lethal force. If a U.S. Navy vessel transiting the Strait of Hormuz, regardless of size, can articulate hostile intent, they're going to shoot the attacker. They have a duty to defend themselves and defend the vessel. And it could potentially cause escalation. So a couple of caveats for this one. I would say the Iranian narrative on the fuel smuggling, it omits strategic motives, and it's kind of the standard legal cover that they use. So I don't know if it was genuine fuel smuggling. I sincerely doubt it. But that language masks the real strategic intent. So I think we're going to have to wait until we can understand exactly why these vessels were targeted and what the true intent behind it was. And until we can get that information, we really don't know what their true motives are. Some of these details, like the exact coordinate, the actors in each incident, they can be blurred by inconsistent initial reporting. It's usually the cleanest baseline when it comes from the UK MTO, but it takes a while to get out there. And it has, because of that delay in reporting, it has the chance to be misreported. So that's what's taking place currently. We have upcoming negotiations in Oman, and we have a lot of disagreement about what the topic is going to be. And meanwhile, while all that's taking place, we're dealing with some drone overflies and some small boat stuff. So let's take just a quick trip down memory lane and look at some of the previous negotiations that have taken place with Iran, what's been historically effective, what has not been effective. They have a repeating pattern when it comes to Iranian negotiations. They work when the scope is very narrow and verification is concrete and leverage is symmetric. For example, the last two administrations and the nuclear reductions that the U.S. has levied against Iran, when they were limited in scope with enforceable, verified inspections from the Atomic Energy Agency, and the leverage was symmetric with sanctions, then it worked. It fails when the deal tries to solve everything, this one size fits all, when they just start really including everything in the kitchen sink. That is when domestic politics in Washington and Tehran swing. And then there's a lot of these side conflicts that get in the mix, proxies, shipping, hostages. Okay. So let's talk about that. 1980-81, Algiers Accords, specifically negotiating for the release of the hostages. I will tell you that they were released the day that Reagan was sworn into office, because they knew beyond the shadow of a doubt, because Reagan had already campaigned on that if they were still hostages when he took office, that there was going to be a direct response. The Iranians may not be the sharpest bulbs in the bunch, but they're glowing a little bit, and they were released immediately once he was sworn into office. But that U.S.-Iran deal, mediated by Algeria to release those U.S. hostages, it also included unfreezing assets and the creation of the U.S.-Iranian Claims Tribunal. So it wasn't just simply release it or else. It was very effective for immediate deliverables, such as the hostages were released, claims mechanisms established, and it wasn't exactly a relationship reset, because it's hard to come back from you had our hostages for 444 days. But it was effective. The lesson here, I would say from that, is Iran will sign if the bargain is explicit and face-saving, but it won't automatically change Tehran's strategic position. Fast forward to 2003, 2005, we had the European Union 3 talks. So it was UK, France, and Germany. The Europeans negotiated Iranian enrichment suspensions and transparency, but there was no robust and enforceable long-term architecture there. The context is widely documented. The problem was there was no durability, there was no enforceability compared with the JCPOA's later monitoring structure. So this slowed down their enrichment, but it did not, it had no durable constraint. So in this instance, the lesson was, without an enforceable verification and sanctions architecture, and without the United States buy-in, these deals are very brittle. And as you can see, it did not last. It took 2013 to 2015's JCPOA, also more commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal. It was the benchmark for this foreign policy, or this State Department policy of it works until politics breaks it. And it broke under Trump. He didn't like it. He thought it was a shitty deal. And in many ways it was. And I don't want to digress into political machinations. I just want to keep this sort of a linear history of negotiations with Iran, what was effective, what wasn't. So this was a secret United States and Iranian contacts, which helped unlock the broader, P5+1 agreement. And when implemented, it achieved much tighter nuclear constraints on Iran. Intrusive monitoring, they had to open all of these sites. They had to declare them. They had to open them up to regular inspections. Some of those inspections were on regularly scheduled timelines. Others were surprise inspections. And they were designed to ensure that their program remained peaceful and violations were detected. We gave them a lot. I mean, we had billions of dollars in frozen assets that we returned to them as part of the agreement. And that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I think if I was truthful, I'd say it probably rubbed me the wrong way. Because you gave billions of dollars back to a known state sponsor of terrorism. Where the fuck did you think that money was going? But I said I wasn't going to digress. Arms control specialists emphasize it extended the breakout time and it created a verification process. And it did. Why did it break? Well, the U.S. withdrew in May of 2018 and reimposed sanctions. And then Iran expanded their nuclear activities. I said, okay, well, if you were going to walk away from the deal and you're going to reimpose the sanctions that you lifted a couple of years ago, then we're out too. So it was technically effective while both sides complied. But as I said, it's politically fragile across administrations. And that has always been the risk when you negotiate with the United States, is that the negotiation, it may not last the current administration. And ratification of foreign treaties is supposed to be an act of Congress. And once a treaty is ratified, it's supposed to be irrevocable unless Congress decides otherwise. But in practice, that has shown not to be the case. And I am not a constitutional scholar, although I do play one on radio. That is the way that I understand it. So happy to admit that I'm wrong, and please write in and tell me otherwise. But the lesson with this one was that with Iran, effective is usually compliance-based. It's not trust-based. If the enforcement and political continuity collapse, then the agreement collapses. And then that was the big takeaway there. That brings us kind of up to 2019 to the present. We have mini deals. We have prisoner swaps. Tactically effective, strategically limited. So essentially, what is it taking place recently? You have these periodic narrow exchanges with Iran to sort of de-escalate, often between intermediaries. And that's what's taking place currently, or will tomorrow, to manage spikes. So sanctions waivers, shipping incidents, proxy flare-ups. And it is effective at stopping bleeding, but it's poor at producing a stable end state, because you're really just plugging holes in the dam. And these are little Band-Aids. Iran is very comfortable operating in a world of managed escalation. That they're almost wrote the book on it. So things like what's going to happen tomorrow, really, it's a pressure valve. It's not a peace treaty. You're never going to get that from Iran. This is a country that has repeatedly called for, death to America, death to Israel. Don't think that the rest of you are off the hook. So if you're a Western democracy, Australia, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Canada, I could go on. you're included in that too. There's just only so much room on the sign for them to write. So it's usually just death to America. The JPOA's effective end state is now in dispute because Iran declared the JPOA effectively terminated on October of 2025 amid wider tensions and Atomic Energy Administration friction or agency friction. So negotiations now start from a worse baseline because there's less trust, there's more nuclear capability on behalf of Iran, and now there's more regional friction based off of everything that's taken place with the protests, the strikes last summer. The conditions that tend to produce effective outcomes when negotiating with Iran are single issue focus. So whether it's hostages being released, nuclear limits, you cannot go into negotiations with Iran with a solve Iran mindset. It doesn't work. And you need hard verification, whether it's IAEA access, monitoring, or measurable caps. It has to be verifiable. Balanced leverage, like sanctions relief that is real and penalties that are credible. Ambiguous and unenforceable doesn't work. You need durability mechanisms that survive leadership changes in the United States or at least reduce the incentive. That can be tricky. And that goes both ways. The durability mechanisms has to survive leadership in Iran as well. But you're talking about a regime that for the most part is elected for life. I mean, yes, they have elections. Yes, they have a quote unquote president, but the Ayatollah is truly the ruling post in that country. And he's adopted for life. Things that will wreck talks when we're talking about negotiations with Iran are mission creep or scope creep. So, you talk about nuclear, but then you add on missiles and then proxies all at once. It's going to tank it. Domestic political volatility in the United States. So if an administration changes or Iran somehow has a hardliner rivalry, what would a more authoritarian regime look like in Iran? I don't know. Probably a lot like North Korea, I would imagine. Things like what's taking place in the Straits of Hormuz or in the waterways surrounding the Gulf. This side theater escalation, the shipping seizures, the proxy attacks. It works tactically, but it poisons trust strategically. So it's something that is also going to tank negotiations if they can't stop these fucking drone attacks and these boat harassment techniques on civilian shipping. U.S. Navy vessels are used to it. They can handle it, and they are really good at sort of restraining any kind of response. And it usually means it results in, at least in my experience, as Iran just backs down when we're talking about these small boats. The effectiveness, I guess the bottom line is effectiveness. It depends on the metric. Are we talking about nuclear risk reduction versus stabilization? Are we talking stabilizing the relationship between our two countries again? The JCPOA probably scored highest on the first and low on the latter two. Did not normalize relations. It did not stabilize the region, but it was effective in reducing their nuclear risk. And then I think it's important to also remember that a lot of these outcomes are inherently unobservable. So evaluations require and rely heavily on verification regimes and Atomic Energy Agency reporting for what can be measured. So that's kind of a history of some of the major negotiations that have taken place with Iran. We will probably not find the outcome until over the weekend or at the very latest midweek. These are not going to be simple negotiations that take place. And I don't know what kind of frame of mind Iran is going into these. What they have said is it is limited in scope to nuclear proliferation. They're not willing to talk about anything else. But when they actually step foot in the venue, that's liable to change, and we'll see. I am pragmatic. I don't see this as resulting in a whole lot, but if it can cool tensions in the region, I'd be okay with that. I'd be okay with that. I think that the United States has its hands full at the moment in a lot of other arenas, and this is not something that we need to be pouring attention into right now. Probably going to spiral out of control again, but I tell you, I really wish that we would just remain laser focused on the end of 2027 and the anticipated takeover of Taiwan. I promise you I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat tonight. I promise you. I think it's reliable. I think it's prescient. I think it's coming. At some point, we're probably just going to have to do an entire segment on China and taking down Taiwan. And speaking of China, that brings us to my next topic, which is, if you watched the news over the last week or so, you may have seen a story announcing that Xi Jinping relieved from duty, fired? I don't know what you would call it. I mean, they are both military officers, so the correct term would be they were relieved of duty. But when you're talking about the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, it's an army under a communist regime. I'm actually surprised that they weren't shot. But you had two very senior generals get relieved. General Zhang and Chief General Liu. Man, I do not speak Mandarin Chinese. You're going to have to give me a break. It is spelled Liu. And do not ask me to pronounce their last names. I won't do it. It's going to take a lot more scotch before that happens. But these individuals were way up there in the military. They were, so Zhang was vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, and the other gentleman was a joint staff department in the Central Military Commission. That would be analogous to relieving a service component commander or somebody on the Joint Chiefs. Or I guess in some cases they're one and the same. The party framed it as serious violations of discipline and law. They had charged both of these individuals with espionage. Whew. And the phrasing of the charges is deliberately elastic because it usually signals corruption and discipline breaches, but it gives the party maximum room to escalate or quietly downshift charges later. This is the public face of their relief. Not exactly sure what is really taking place. There's a lot of people that are theorizing about it. I can tell you there's a lot of people in Taiwan that are watching this because these two individuals were many believed to be the few experienced people in the room that would help plan and execute a attack on Taiwan. So the fact that these two were relieved and are being charged with, espionage-related accusations is alarming in some respects and confusing in some others. Multiple outlets are reporting espionage-related charges up to and including claims about leaked ties to strategic programs. That's circulating alongside the corruption narrative. Now, both of these individuals had access to a lot of money that would have been allocated towards programs. A lot of these programs were high level. We're talking programs that are involving rockets, command and control, space, and cyber. So there is a lot of people who are making an assumption that there was corruption, that they were skimming money, and that may have very well been the case. I don't know to what degree the level of corruption is pervasive in the People's Republic of China. There's a lot of other countries where we have intelligence assets on the ground and access to, real-time reporting about corruption at that high level of governments. China's just not one of them. They do a very good job of internally policing their own. Understand that these allegations are not being confirmed by Beijing in the same explicit terms. So this needs to be treated as information warfare, at least until it's corroborated by hard public evidence, which we may never find out. What the public face of this is that they are being relieved for espionage-related accusations, but it's not being verified by Beijing. So Zhang this guy's not a random theater commander. His dad was a general. He was born in 1950. He is way up there in the People's Republic of China, PLA, People's Liberation Army. If you didn't know, by the way, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, the PLA describes everything. So there's the People's Liberation Army, and there's the PLA Navy, and there's the PLA Air Force. Gets kind of confusing. He's described, though, as central to Xi's control of the gun, right? This sort of the man with his finger on the button. And removing or investigating somebody at this altitude, it signals that loyalty is conditional and proximity is not protection. I think, and many others do as well, that both of these individuals were either becoming more popular than they should have or being seen by Xi Jinping as disloyal, and he was tightening house. He was cleaning up. Much the same way that North Korea does. Be very careful if you're a general in North Korea. Be good at your job, be popular, but do not outshine the number one person or you're going to be shot. This whole thing sits inside a longer PLA purification wave. So in recent years, we have seen repeated purges across a lot of sensitive modernization portfolios that the same programs that I mentioned earlier. And the Pentagon's assessed that corruption and investigations and removals likely disrupted modernization progress towards a lot of these goals. These individuals and the ones that came before them that were also purged were shepherding a lot of the PLA's modernization efforts. And all of this is marching towards an anticipated 2027 invasion of Taiwan. So that's why Taiwan is scratching their head about this and looking at this very closely, because they're asking themselves, does this accelerate a timeline towards invasion? Does it delay it? Does it off-ramp it? What impacts is it going to have? I don't know. But in any high security military, actual compromise is plausible. We have it happen in the United States. A lot of others happen. But espionage, it's also the perfect moral weapon because it turns a potential rival into a traitor, not just a corrupt official. And that justifies a very extreme measure and scares the entire officer corps into self-policing. You want to scare the shit out of your troops, you line one of them up and you shoot them. Because you are going to make everybody scared that they may be the next one shot. It's what the Romans did. It's where the term decimate comes from. Decimating. The PLA's modernization is a procurement and promotion machine. Where there's rapid spending, there's always going to be corruption. And multiple analysis emphasize that the PLA's long-running vulnerabilities in promotion and acquisitions is exactly the pressure points that Xi has repeatedly targeted. So I have no doubt that there is most assuredly a level of corruption at this echelon, but it's very interesting that he would relieve two of his most senior generals. But I mean, Xi's strategic problem, it's very, very simple. You can't execute a Taiwan contingency or deter the United States with a force that you don't trust, especially when you talk about rocket forces, command and control, space, and cyber, as well as joint logistics. And there's a lot of analysts who feel that that's all this was. You know, the corruption charges, the espionage, the rest of it is that's the official party line. That's window dressing. A lot of people were theorizing that this was he is cleaning house. He is making sure that people are loyal. The Department of War has highlighted and reported a major reorganization in China's information warfare architecture. For example, they dissolved the Strategic Support Force. They created a new force. If you didn't know, the Chinese military, the PLA, has units who do psychological warfare just like the United States military does. They have units that do cyber warfare just like the U.S. military does. The difference is in how both of our countries employ them. Our military uses psychological warfare, PSYOPs, psychological operations, as a component of theater war, as combat. It's an enabler. You know, in Iraq in 2003, they dropped hundreds and hundreds of thousands of leaflets, these kick-ass little pieces of paper into Iraq, telling the individuals in that country, you know, basically, don't shoot at us, lay down your arms, turn over your weapons, a whole bunch of stuff. And China uses that same psychological operations against everyone in a peacetime modality. They do it. Disinformation warfare in social media is rampant. And briefly allow me a quick digression here, because I think it is topical. Part of the problem and the vulnerability of U.S. society is the fact that we silo so massively when it comes to where we get our information from. Most Americans live in this really insulated echo chamber. And because of the way that the algorithms work, whether it's TikTok, you know, X, Facebook, Instagram, it doesn't matter. It targets information towards your personal likes. And if you are, and I'm just picking at random, so if you happen to be a left-leaning liberal, you will consume content that is confirmation bias. So if you're right-leaning Republican, you tend to stick towards certain topics, certain news sources. And China knows this. Russia knows this. Our adversaries know this. And so how easy is it to foment false narratives when you just create hundreds of thousands of pieces of information, data, targeting your particular demographic of interest? And because critical thinking apparently is a dying art, you don't read anything that disagrees with your ingrained bias. Okay, let's get back to China, shall we? Now that I have disenfranchised at least some of you. For God's sakes, just read different sources. Okay, that was the takeaway. Support. So you had all these purges. They've really had a reorganization in China's information warfare architecture. We talked about that. We've talked about how it's part of a broader modernization And it's exactly the kind of change where loyalty, competence, and secrecy become essential. So when you remove experienced senior leaders midstream, it creates friction in joint force planning, bureaucratic throughput. And so even pro-PLA analysts, I want to make sure I get this right, they acknowledge leadership decapitation introduces this near-term disruption. There is a second-order effect to what he has done, but he may accept it. Xi may accept the cost to get a force that is more loyal, more conformist, more politically safe. He may have looked at this and looked at the calendar and decided now's the time. When a regime starts using traitor and spy logic near the top, it's a sign of trust collapse. Pure and simple. And that can produce a couple of things, but they have effects. It gives you tighter compartmentalization. Unfortunately, that means slower decision cycles. It gives you increased counterintelligence sweeps, but that also means more false positives. You get a much more risk-averse commander, less initiative. The United States doesn't do stuff like this. Our culture just doesn't do it. There are so many things culturally that give the United States military and Western militaries, I don't want to confine this strictly to the United States, that give Western militaries an advantage. This kind of shit just doesn't happen in Western militaries. This is the kind of thing that happens in Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, a couple other places throughout the world. Our decentralization, our initiative-based, our NCO core, massive edge, can't be repeated, can't be duplicated. It has to be grown. And this kind of move from Xi breaks patronage webs. It's a purge that teaches a lesson. It says your survival depends on alignment, not performance. And it stabilizes his control, Xi's control, but it degrades candid feedback. And it's a classic strongman trade-off. You can't tell the emperor that he has no clothes, or you risk being fired or worse. Yeah. So it was interesting. It's definitely going to be interpreted by a lot of rivals as a counterintelligence tightening. So it's going to be much more hardened, much more harder for us to penetrate. If you don't think that every country in the world spies on every other country in the world, you're naive and you're kidding yourself. And if you just look at what each country's GDP is and what they can afford to export in the espionage world, that should tell you a little bit about what the capabilities of each country are. This is going to create a lot of elite insecurity, and that's going to cause more miscalculation risk. So what to watch next on this one? If I was to say, does the language shift from discipline and law to state secrets and espionage? That would be an escalation. These two individuals may just quietly go away. Right now, it's being framed as, a disciplinary infraction, a violation of law, some corruption, some graft. Beijing has not publicly called it espionage, state secret violations, but if it changes, then that means that it's no longer a simple, I am purging the ranks. It's, I am making a very public example. Who's replacing them is another thing you want to look for. Younger, more politically aligned officers imply ideological tightening and procurement freeze and cancellation. So look at contract pauses in aerospace, defense sectors. That would suggest that this purge is actually impacting their modernization progress. I think it will. I think it has to. I think people this high up with this much purview being relieved, you can't help but have some spillage. And then I would very much like to continue to watch the Taiwan Strait operational tempo to see what impacts there are on that. So that's what's taken place in China over the past week or so. I'm going to continue to look at this. This is something that is not going away. The People's Republic of China and their absolute laser focus on Taiwan is, I think it's just going to be the line du jour for the next 18 to 24 months. And I'll be here, glass of whiskey in hand, ready to report on it. So before we wrap up this evening's broadcast, as I am often fond of doing, going to invite my friend and producer, Jason Maris, into the conversation, see if he has any questions for me that I can offer up an opinion on.
I don't really have much to expound on here or ask. I feel like you've covered what you've covered pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
I do think that the Iran thing is interesting. You know, the push to escalate, it seems kind of tied around Trump's pumping the brakes and then feeling like they're testing the waters. You know, meanwhile, it seems that, you know, Israel is wanting some autonomy and striking whether or not we do anything or not. And so that would be the thing to keep an eye on, because that could actually escalate things pretty quickly if that were the case.
Yeah. I don't think they will. I don't think that the administration is going to allow, not that we have Netanyahu on a leash, but I think that if Trump calls him and says, listen, buddy, now's not the time, I'm pretty confident that Netanyahu would respect that request.
Yeah, I would think so for sure. But I mean, he seems like while he's got his defense system restocked and in place, that he's pretty anxious to do something, for which he has been for, you know, a seemingly long time. So it'll definitely be interesting to keep an eye on. That's for sure.
Yeah. 100%.
And China, just like you said, they have this laser focus on Taiwan. I have a hard time seeing the play here. You have a much better, you know, idea about that than I would. So, you know, the Taiwan situation is just so ambiguous to me as to like the plausibility of like the actual strike and when that's going to be, you know, considering everything else that's going on in the world. It just seems strategically like China always just kind of drifts into the shadows and waits, you know. And what is going to be the catalyst?
They definitely look at a calendar while we look at our wristwatch. I've said that metaphor many, many times. That's not really a metaphor. But everything public, like all of the military, all of the Western world is all going off of an assumption that it's end of 2027, because that is what they have announced and that is what we are preparing for. It's not like I just picked that date out of a hat. I'm not Nostradamus. I'm not rolling bones over here. I'm just...
I like that visual.
They have a timeline. Yeah, I know, right? They have a timeline. Their timeline, not ours. They're the ones that have basically created the 2027 timeline. So that's what everybody else is going off of. I mean, could they wake up next week and decide? Yeah, they could. But there's so many things that have to happen. first. They don't have the missiles in stock. They do not have some of their space assets in stock. They don't have the drones that they need. They are not trained yet. They have many more drills that they have to do. They're just not there. They need the time. And I think that these purges were truly idealistic in nature. I do not think that there's anything other than that. I think he just made a loyalty purge.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, the strike on Venezuela, the Maduro situation would amplify that for China. Yeah, it's like, does that increase the timeline? I don't know, but it seems like that's the kind of efficiency that they're building towards, or trying to build towards.
Yeah.
And maybe it was an oh shit moment after the Venezuela thing because of the air defense systems failing and all of that stuff that were Chinese and Russian made. They're like,
they were. Yep.
What the fuck? You guys suck. Get out of here.
We like I laugh because every time we talk about Venezuela, all my mind can do is go to that news report and video where they were like, the SF guys had laser weapons and some kind of high-tech weaponry. How else could they have killed so many people so fast? There's no way the U.S. force that small could be that effective. And I'm like, dude, yeah, I laugh. Like, that's fine. You can believe that. And there's aliens at Area 51, and we never landed on the moon, and every other thing you say is true. Yep. Just roger that.
Yeah. A group of pipe hitters can't kill 34 people in a quick and efficient manner.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
But the other funny thing about that, which I don't know if you saw any of this stuff with Trump, explaining the discombobulator, which he named, by the way, that
I
they used.
I saw it. I don't have firsthand knowledge of the discombobulator. I definitely want one. That's the name of my new band, by the way. It's going to be Brad and the Discombobulators.
That's amazing. I sense t-shirts in the future.
I totally do. We have to get some t-shirts made up immediately. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Brad and the Discombobulators. Dare I say, big gay Brad and the Discombobulators.
Look, man, why do we got to put labels on everything like that? Why? What?
It's just it's a nod to Ray. Well,
oh yeah, I understood what the nod was.
Anyway, that's really all I really got. I mean,
okay.
I actually was listening to that speech because he said it twice, and recently I think it was even yesterday. That he said it, and it had me in tears.
Dude, it's so fucking cool. Like he, and it's not just him, right? Like a lot of administrations have gaffed, and a lot of administrations have probably said things that they haven't. I know Obama did after the OBO raid, but it's like, bro, shut the fuck up. Even if there was, and there's not a discombobulator, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to talk about it.
I mean, shut the fuck up. That is like, that pretty much like sums up the administration. Oh, God.
Yeah, bro. It's been a fun ride. Like, I'll tell you what, you are entertained. You cannot say that this administration is not entertaining. If CNN and MS Now or MSNBC or whatever the fuck they're calling themselves would be out of a job if Trump had not gotten elected for the second time. Both networks shut down, just done. Can you imagine covering a Kamala Harris administration year, one? We're now into like 13, 14 months.
Yeah, it would be a very.
What are you going to report on? Her latest pants suit?
The color of it, anyway.
The color,
Possibly.
yeah. Honestly, the investors, if you're a shareholder of either one of those networks, you have to be thanking your stars that Trump got elected.
Well, and I think that is, if you just look at the media and you start to look at biases, and it's a perfect fit for the times, with everything
It's
that's going
absolutely,
on.
yeah. Yep. It is. It absolutely is. I would love it if it wasn't that way, but it is. And so, you get the elected officials you deserve in many ways. And this is what America has right now. And this is what we get. And I'm just enjoying it. I'm along for the ride. I don't get incensed at everything that is said and done. You can't. You can't. You can't have an aneurysm every time somebody goes on public access television and pisses you off.
No, you'll end up in the insane asylum.
Yeah, you got to take a page from Bob Ross, man.
I do think, that being said, there are elements of darkness that are disconcerting in a way that is beyond measure. And I say the Epstein files and the release of all those and all of the baggage that comes with that, because that is some dark ass shit. And that runs deep.
It is. Yep.
And it's scary, and it's sad, and it's pathetic, and it's a real problem, and it's being treated like it's not. And that's where.
But see, I don't know about that. I disagree. I don't think that it is being treated like it is not. I don't think it is. I will grant you that from the individuals that are at harm from that, they probably feel that way. But this is going to come across as callous, and I don't want it to be. So don't misunderstand my statement. But there's only so much attention that we have available, and it's being pulled in a lot of different directions right now.
By design.
The man. But I don't know. I don't know if it's by design or not. I mean, that implies a level of sophistication and coordination I just don't attribute to the United States government. But be that as it may,
that's true. I'll give you that.
be that as it may, the Epstein issue was adjudicated in a court of law and will continue to be so. I have faith that the justice system will work, and that these victims will have their day in court. I don't need to adjudicate it in public opinion.
I can appreciate your positivity in that, and I'll leave it there.
We have to give faith and trust to our institutions. If we don't, we don't have a society.
It's just a shame at the turtle's pace in which it has moved.
Yes, I grant you that.
And all of the promises that were made, and all the campaigning that was done and run on, and all of the lies.
Justice is blind; it is not fast.
Yeah.
And a campaign promise is not law. A campaign promise is the shit that I ran on for class president in elementary school, which was longer recess and free pizza.
Well, and that's true. I mean, campaign promises, it's the cliche for lying.
Yeah.
You just, it just feeds on people's need for like the truth, and like they want to believe, so you give them exactly what they want. And apparently in this instance, they thought that this was the person that was going to deliver it. And he definitely was not.
Well, I don't know if he was or if he wasn't. It will come to light. Everything eventually does. The one thing that the United States cannot do with any degree of fidelity is keep a secret. If there is culpability to be found, it will come out. It will. I mean, that's just human nature. And we have a culture of free press. Some people can argue that, fine, but we do. We have free press. We have investigative journalism. And honestly, the incentive to investigate this in many cases is political advantage. It's financial advantage. You be the first one to break some bomb in the Epstein file, you're going to make a mint in broadcasting or in print media or, whatever your platform is. You are going to have tremendous political leverage. You are going to have notoriety and fame. And if nothing else, if it wasn't journalistic integrity that drives you, it's one of these other ones. Either way, the truth is going to come out because that's just the way that human nature works. And our system enables it more than any other system on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, my favorite saying is duration is the measure of truth. I believe that. I think that in these times, it's an instant gratification society, and so maybe that's what's amplifying it in a way too.
It's 100%. And people are not. God, I sound like a broken record today. They're incapable of applying any critical thinking. Get out of your fucking echo chamber and listen to a challenged viewpoint. You just got to wait. God, hold on. I got to tell people to get off my lawn. Okay, that's done. Because I sound like an old man. We used to look things up. Remember?
Yeah. This is a reoccurring theme. We talk about this a lot.
All the time.
Because it's so maddening that
it's just, we used to, I would ask my father or my mom a question and they knew the answer to those assholes and they would go look it up. And so there I would have to trundle off to the encyclopedia, which, by the way, for some of our younger viewers, they were a series of books, A through Z, where you would look information up. Now, you pick up your phone and in 2 seconds, an AI algorithm is going to spit out an answer that may or may not be right. But in the act of looking it up, you retained the information more because you worked for it more. You had to learn it, not just read it. You had to learn it. We don't do that anymore. We want it instant. And I think you hit it right on the head, Jason. People are upset about the Epstein as a topic because it is moving so slow. What they seem to forget is that's how oftentimes the justice system progresses. It is slow, but it is methodical. And I'm sorry, in this case, you can call me optimistic, but I have to believe that it will work. It's not perfect, but there is no alternative.
Yeah. That's what I like about you, Brad. You're hopelessly optimistic.
Nah, that's a lie. I am cynical. I am a cynical asshole. Okay. I'm not optimistic. I'm pragmatic.
You're a cynical asshole. That's the difference.
I am cynical. But I have faith. I have faith in the country. I have faith in our institutions. I have faith in the justice system. I think it will work. I believe in it. I have to. Because if you don't, this doesn't work. This democracy that we're a part of, it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And on that note, I think the big gay Brad and the discombobulators is done for the night.
I'm done for the night. All right. So that is our SITREP broadcast for the week of February 5th. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And if you are extra generous, please feel free to visit our Patreon and show some of that love. At the very least, like us, subscribe to us, spread the word. We have a tremendous number of guests that are coming up on the horizon. Each of them, I think, are going to be fascinating in what they have to talk about and share. And until next time, I am your host, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding everyone to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.